Our next panel will discuss how 5G is accelerating innovation across industries and unlocking growth for Maryland's economy. Please welcome the Executive Director of the MD5G Partnership, Laura Toraldo.
I know it didn't take 2 years of living through a pandemic to show us all that it's how important connection and connectivity can be. But it certainly made us pay attention and realize how much we rely on it, not just for FaceTiming with our loved ones, but for remote work, for learning, and for simply participating in our economy. I know everyone in this room probably thinks they know 5G. You've heard about it in the news, you've seen commercials for it, you know that it's the future. But today, our experts want to pull back the veil and really help all of you not only to understand what 5G is capable of, but what really it's going to take to make it a reality for us in Maryland. So my name is Laura Toraldo. I am the Executive Director of the Maryland 5G Partnership. We launched MD5G in the summer of 2020 and have grown to over 30 organizations statewide across industry sectors who have come together to support expanding connectivity throughout Maryland. Our collective organizations work together through MD5G to advocate and educate for a better connected state. And we're accepting interested partners, so if you're interested, I'd be happy to talk more. But I want to take a moment and turn the attention to our panelists here. And if I could pass the mic to each of you to talk a little bit about yourselves, your organization, and how you are connected to 5G. Starting with Chris.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Chris Carroll, Regional Director of External and Legislative Affairs for a small startup you may have heard of called AT&T. Not so much, we're a pretty large company, but, we have tremendous assets in the state and look forward to being here with you all this morning.
Good morning. My name is Didden. I'm in charge of government affairs for state and local Maryland in the District of Columbia. We are an infrastructure company, so we build out the fiber, the towers, the small cells that support wireless networks and help make your phones work as best as they can.
Hello, I'm Duffy. I'm a physician, regional medical director of an organization called Concentra. We are the largest provider of occupational medicine services in the country. We essentially help employers with employee-related health issues, whether it's treating injured workers, performing regulatory exams on a police officer or firefighter to ensure that they're safe. And anything an employer needs from a health standpoint for their employees, that's what we do. We have 15 locations here in Maryland, and just recently received the contract to take over Maryland state government employee care, so we're excited. I'm excited to be here.
I'm Mike Foss. I work for Vision Technologies. Vision Technologies is a national technology integrator headquartered in Glen Burnie, Maryland, about $160 million in revenue last year and 600 employees. I head up the mobility practice at Vision Technologies, which encompasses cellular DAS, public safety DAS, Wi-Fi, and route switch.
Good morning. My name is Paul Lennon. I'm the CTO at Skyline Technology Solutions. We are based also in Glen Burnie, ironically. And we support state and local business across over 19 states presence today in helping better leverage technology, both from a communications infrastructure, consulting, engineering, and then operating those environments.
Thank you, everyone. So a lot of expertise up on the stage here today. I'm going to turn it over to Carly with Crown Castle, who's going to give an overview of what 5G is and bring us all up to speed.
So under the heading of a picture says 1,000 words, we're going to go with some graphics today. So we always we hear about 5G all the time. Well, what is it? Why should we care? What does it do? So 5G helps support all those applications that we want to use that our phones today, and maybe not everybody's, can't really support. So a lot of it is building on technology. So if you think back, when we first had a cell phone, it was basically a device for phone calls in an emergency. It was big, it was clunky, not many people used them. From an analog voice only, we went to a device that could do voice and text. From voice and text, we then started to get mobile data. So I've had a cell phone since '96, and I can tell you the difference is mind-blowing. My first phone was a brick, and I could make a phone call. It was $20 a month for like 20 minutes. And now I have an iPhone, and it's basically a mini computer in my pocket. So with each one of these changes in the Gs, so now we're up to 4G, we get a whole new set of applications and big new demands. So if you think about it, 4G has brought us things like Uber and mobile Facebook and all kinds of things that we never thought we could do before. GPS built into our phone. You don't have to worry about if it's in your car anymore. So what's 5G going to do? Well, the jump to 5G is extraordinary. So 20 times faster, 10,000 times more capacity, and a decrease in latency. So what does this all mean? It means that our phones are going to be able to connect to a network that's going from a drinking straw to a fire hose. And that's what's so exciting. Because if you now have access to a fire hose worth of data capacity, you can now use your device to do so many different things you couldn't even think of before. Like, everybody talks about streaming movies. Well, it's gonna go much faster. So it doesn't take minutes to download, it takes a split second. And it doesn't hiccup anymore. It's smooth, like you were in the movie theater. But that's only the beginning of what we're gonna do, because we don't even know yet. Now, 5G, 4G, 3G, 2G, what are all these Gs? So these Gs all coincide with different parts of the spectrum band. So spectrum is a fancy word for radio waves. So one end is, we see things like light and X-rays, the other end you have things like a toaster. And depending on where you are within the chunk of spectrum that's used for mobile telephony, our cell phones, depends on what you have access to. So when you have what's called high band spectrum, it doesn't go through buildings. So if you're on your phone and you're connected to a 5G network and you go inside a building into an elevator where there's no windows, you're no longer on 5G. But if you're using mid-band or low-band spectrum, it does go through walls. And that spectrum is really exciting because it means that we can do different things and that doesn't get stuck. So if you look at your phone and it says 5G, there are different flavors of 5G. And sometimes, I know on my phone now, I see different 5G labels. And that reflects which of the 5G networks, spectrum bands, for that particular company I'm using at that moment. So if you think about it, it's just one layer on top of the other so that we all can have a seamless experience. In order for that to happen, we have to keep deploying more infrastructure because all of these ability to use your phone, you have to connect to an antenna, a tower. That tower could be a big tower you see in the right-of-way on the side of the road. It could be an antenna on a rooftop. It could be an antenna that's hidden in a light pole or attached to a wood utility pole. You never know where it's gonna be. So when we jumped to 4G, we had this explosive use of data. And what this slide is telling you is how much of an increase that is. And one of the exciting things is all the different kinds of applications that developed that we couldn't imagine. So it helps us with public safety. It helps us get our homework done. It helps us, have a video chat with grandma. All of these different things. So what's coming for 5G? Well, we're not quite sure yet. But this is some of the things that we can think about. It's how we all work together. How do we move our life into that mobile sphere? So we talked about the metaverse, right? And how you're going onto this digital platform, this digital world. Well, how about taking that digital world with you on your cell phone as you travel throughout your day? 5G networks are going to support that data-heavy application. It's going to give you that seamless connectivity as you move from a wireless network outside on a cell phone, a traditional cellular network, to maybe a Wi-Fi network in your house, and then to a VPN for your office. It just means that you don't have this choppiness of standing there going, oh, where'd my signal go? How come this email won't go through? How come my device just shows me a spinning wheel of death? That's what 5G is going to help us solve. So we think about, okay, we can now do all this whiz-bang cool stuff, But what else does it mean for the community as a whole? And this is where it's exciting, because you now have the ability for multiple students to connect to a network. We can do remote healthcare. We can support people that don't live next to a hospital. We can support people that have diseases that require constant monitoring. We can do that remotely. That's something that can be done behind the scenes on a 5G network, because it uses spectrum that's now prioritized. A fancy way of saying we have, a fast lane and a slow lane in 5G land. So you can have different things going on at the same time. Building all these networks means that you're investing in the economy. And one thing we know for sure is that the better the connectivity in the community, the more attractive it is a place to live, to work, to learn there. And that's what we're seeing. And with all of the connectivity that we have in urban areas, it helps us bridge that digital divide, because now we can push that connectivity out to the next level, to the next group of people that don't live so much in the city center. So how do you build a 5G network? Well, guess what? You take a 4G network that we already have and you beef it up. So how do you beef it up? Well, you change antennas that are on rooftops that are attached to towers. You also add something called a small cell. So a small cell is attached to a pole, generally in the right-of-way, could be on a private, street light in a parking lot. And what these different layers of antennas of connectivity do is they move traffic throughout the network. So if everybody was trying to connect to an antenna, say on the rooftop of this building, we're gonna overload that antenna, and guess what happens? Spinning wheel of death. But if there's a small cell in the parking lot, or 2 or 3, and there's a tower up the road, that means that some of us are gonna connect to the small cell, some of us are gonna connect to that rooftop antenna, and then all that data gets aggregated back to a central point, and none of us end up with the spinning wheel of death. So there's nothing to be scared about when we say we need additional infrastructure to support 5G networks. It's actually great, because it means that your cell phone is going to work more reliably when you want it, when you need it. There's nothing worse if you can think of an emergency situation being somewhere on the side of the road and you can't get your cell phone to work. 5G is going to help us solve that because of the additional infrastructure that we're going to put out there to help support everyone's use of these services. So, incredible demand. How do we get this infrastructure out there faster, cheaper, more efficiently? So, one outcome of COVID is all of the infrastructure money that's out there. And a lot of that money we can use working partnered with communities and municipalities to expand these networks and to help reduce regulatory barriers so that we can deploy faster and more efficiently. Super important. So, for instance, one big hurdle with deploying infrastructure is you have to connect it all together. So even though it's wireless antennas, it all connects together with fiber optic cables. Well, they either have to go on a utility pole or they have to go underground. Well, we all know and we all hate the lane closures for blocks and blocks and blocks because somebody's trying to put infrastructure in. It could be fiber, it could be water lines, it could be electrical. Well, we've developed as an industry, a construction industry, different building techniques. So instead of a big open trench that closes many lanes and disrupts business and residences from having access to parking, you have micro-trenching. So instead of a trench that's 12 inches wide, it's now 3. And you can close that trench, you run 2 machines, one opens the road and lays the fiber, and the next one goes behind it and fills the trench. So that means you're in and out in record time. And so people don't have to deal with days and days of closures of their road. So these are some of the reasons why 5G should be important to all of us and what we can do to help move it forward and why it's so important. Laura?
Thank you, Carly. So a lot of good information there. Before we start talking about how different industries are impacted or will be impacted by 5G, I just want to open it up to the panelists to see if there's anything to add to looking at the big picture of what 5G is and what it'll bring.
I'll jump in. Carly did a great job giving the overview. I think it's important for all of you guys to take away today, when you're thinking about the needs of your business, the needs of your community, 5G wireless technology need to be in that talk track as you think about your conversations with elected officials, legislators, people in the community that make a difference, including yourselves, because they don't think about it that way, but the impact is tremendous. We've seen it with COVID, that there are, students who've had, tremendous difficulty, staying up with the virtual environment, people that have had to alter their work schedules, their life arrangements, just because they weren't able to go to work because we were shut down, and technology became, or the importance of technology, wireless technology, broadband technology, was really highlighted to an extent that I don't think we've ever seen before. And I don't think we're going back. I mean, we're going to be in this hybrid environment, but the demand is only going to continue to grow, and elected officials and stakeholders in the community need to understand the importance of helping this technology to be deployed and to really work to eliminate barriers that, rightly or wrongly, in their mind, may need to be removed, so that this can get out there faster, so their constituents can benefit, because that's who benefits at the end of the day, and they'll be happy, they'll be better communities, and we'll have better outcomes. So.
Okay. Thank you. So I want to start the discussion by just diving deeper into some of the applications of 5G technology. And I know Carly touched on a few there, but want to talk about some of Maryland's critical industries. And Paul, I know through your work with Skyline that you've created a lot of solutions for the transportation industry. So could you speak more to some of the innovative ways that technology and 5G could make an impact there?
Yeah, actually, in the transportation space, one of the biggest applications of 5G, and what there'll probably be a lot of change and revolution in the next few years, it's kind of interesting, it ties to the previous presenters, is connected and autonomous vehicle infrastructure. So when you think about a car, cars are getting smarter, they're starting to sense more around them, and there's more, what the DOTs, the Departments of Transportation, are doing is they have things like they manage the traffic signals, they understand what's going on with the roads, whether they're frozen, whether there's an accident ahead, whatever those attributes are. So there's some knowledge that the DOT has, and they want to be able to share that with the driving public. And one way of doing that is go hit a website that'll tell you currently you're stuck in traffic. Kind of at the connected at the furthest extreme is when something happens near you, I'm using that term in air quotes for right now, your car is automatically notified. So an example of this is like heavy braking ahead. And I'm going to actually point to something. I don't know if you've heard what happened in Pennsylvania just a few days ago. There was a snow whiteout condition, terrible crash, and just terrible situation. Even sensors like cameras on cars wouldn't be able to help because they can't see either. So if you have basically the infrastructure being able to communicate between cars, hey, a lot of cars have stopped. A car has flipped, communicating to all the cars coming down the road, right on their dashboards, heads-up display. I'm going to go to the metaverse that we were just talking about earlier, but displaying right on the screen, there's something of concern. I'm going to start braking your car for you because you're at risk. That requires a level of connectivity, instantaneousness, because that's not important 3 minutes later. It's important right now. And it's within the, depending on your proximity to that event, it can be in the 10 to 15 milliseconds, kind of the study times of, which is where technologies like 5G, and Carly, thank you, you covered an amazing amount of information. There is one element that's interesting in 5G is this kind of attribute of heavy amounts of bandwidth, and also this idea of very low latency. And that for the specific application I'm talking about right now, is low latency is the key component. It doesn't matter how much bandwidth you have if I don't get it fast enough. So kind of this merger, and 5G is the first kind of technology that starts to merge all these different needs for different kinds of applications. The last one on that is things like low power consumption. So the DOT, and there's going to be some other applications, but basically have some sensor, doesn't matter what the kind of sensor is deployed somewhere where there potentially is no power. I'm out on the side of a highway, a mountain range, tunnel, whatever that may be. And I don't necessarily want to replace that sensor and replace that battery or figure out how to get power to that device. But if I can have a sensor that can run on battery for 5 years and use very low power consumption, but be able to communicate back information, a portion of 5G is being able to kind of communicate with these kinds of low power applications. So there's just a universe of opportunities in 5G, which used to be a mixture of different technologies before 5G. You'd have to know lots of different technologies. So that's some of the things that we see in kind of the DOT space.
That's great. So speaking of that universe of 5G and Sean taking a look at what that would mean for healthcare and the work that you do with Concentra, can you kind of paint the picture of how technology is impacting healthcare now and what 5G could mean for the future of healthcare?
Yeah, thank you. So I think certainly with the pandemic situation, taking medicine virtual has been really catalyzed by that. So we have telemedicine is a real tangible one I think folks are familiar with. Really, just about every healthcare organization, mine included, essentially needed to come up with a telemedicine solution essentially overnight. And really sort of mainstream that interface. And so that has really catapulted us forward with regards to the capability to do that, and then really the acceptance in that interaction. I mean, seeing the doctor virtually was not something we did 5-10 years ago on a consistent basis, but right now it's really very, very commonplace. So sort of, that's certainly been our recent experience. Another one that's real, I think, folks are aware of and have experience is wearable technology, an Apple Watch, reporting biometric data back like blood pressure and those kinds of things, maybe even a pulse rhythm, a rhythm strip, sort of a rudimentary rhythm strip. Those things are sort of, right now happening. 5G transition, I think the big things to think about here, the impact of more speed, reliability, the low latency, and then the big one I think of is all those are important, but additionally the massive interconnectivity of machines. So it's not just that we're getting the data fast, and that it's that they're linked together. So the devices are linked together, and so that really changes the scenario from a medical standpoint. Sort of, going back to a little bit of the sensor piece. So if you sort of future product, and we're sort of getting there, but Zoom Plus or Telemedicine Plus. So it's not just a video conference, but adding a sensor layer, you could get a whole lot more from a physical exam standpoint. You could get a whole lot more from a biometric measurement standpoint. I mean, getting real-time data back, where that visit can be more impactful because there's more information available, and so you can make a treatment intervention or recommendation more real time. So just a couple of those things. I think further down the line, surgical indications, robotics. The low latency is going to be critical on robotic adjustments. So if we've got movements, surgical movements, it needs to be timely, really sort of real time if you're going to be doing any sort of delicate precision. And then longer out, I see is more like remote access for very sophisticated things like that, potentially getting subspecialized care out remote. Even with a procedure, I see that as sort of longer term target from a sort of progress for medicine.
And what that means would be, a surgeon from Johns Hopkins performing a surgery in Maine for a patient in need.
Potentially, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing. Okay, so when we think about manufacturing, tech, and other industries, can anyone touch on some of the other impacts that 5G will have quickly?
Sure. I think from a technology standpoint, understanding 5G and the different layers and where we're going to see 5G is really important. The aspects of the millimeter wave 5G, which is all the marketing hype that everybody sees every day, that's the 1 or 2 second downloads of a movie, that rich bandwidth user experience. C-band and that C-band auction, each of the carriers spent millions of dollars for this C-band auction in the 3.7, 3.8 gig space. And they're going to use that a lot faster as they ramp up, after it's cleared FCC and the FAA, muck that they went through. Carriers are asking us to start to design indoor DAS around the C-band technology, which means that we're going to have 5G indoors. Millimeter wave really is not feasible indoors. So that experience that you get in the Apple store or with the Verizon store when they sell you this new phone, you're typically not going to get inside of a building, inside your home. But the advantages of having that dedicated spectrum for that data offload from the 4G network is going to be extremely important, twice as fast as 4G LTE, 3 times, 4 times as fast in some cases. It's going to be really what drives the content for the way that businesses function, especially in manufacturing. When you talk about robotics, when you talk about connectivity, you talk about sensors, IoT, all of those things are going to be interconnected across multiple platforms, whether it's 5G, Wi-Fi 6 has barely been out and Wi-Fi 7's on the horizon. There's so many different technologies and different ways to connect. 5G is going to be one of the most prolific. When we think about the user experience that we've had with COVID and students that could not connect to Wi-Fi because their family didn't have Wi-Fi. And the 4G connection on their phone wouldn't connect fast enough for them to have that distance learning capability, face-to-face time, especially for the younger generation when they're out of school. 5G is going to be capable of all of that, where those people will not necessarily need Wi-Fi in their home in order to connect with that user-rich experience. So businesses, it's coming. A lot of people, when they drive around, will have it, especially downtown Baltimore has tons of Crown Castle fiber and small cells with millimeter wave 5G. It is basically a line of sight. If you had a 5G millimeter wave node in this room, you would not have 5G outside of this room, which is the reason it's just cost prohibitive to put it everywhere indoors. But outdoors, it's really going to be a game changer for the way that we do business.
That's also why it's so important, and you see that wireless companies have spectrum in different bands because the different bands give them different operating properties. So high band, the millimeter wave 5G spectrum doesn't go through walls, but mid-band and low band does. So you see these multiple layers of spectrum being used in a single small cell or tower site so that people have the experience of being able to go indoors and outdoors.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that 5G today doesn't work without 4G at all. 5G is data only. You're not making 5G calls. But that offload will not only enrich your data experience and what you can do with that data on these advanced devices that we all carry, 300 million plus smartphones today, but it's also going to enrich your voice experience on 4G because you're offloading the bandwidth that the data is currently consuming in that 4G network.
I think another element that kind of when we talk to our customers is 5G is not 5G is not 5G. So there's lots of attributes of 5G, and anybody who's got a phone that says 5G, you don't necessarily have everything that Carly talked about everywhere. So understanding where are you looking to deploy systems and what characteristics of 5G do you need, and therefore what 5G do you need effectively? That's where it's a little confusing. And it isn't a marketing, I'm trying to confuse the market. It's a very comprehensive set of technologies within one descriptor. So understanding kind of where are you deploying and do you need the low latency? Is it bandwidth you need? What are the attributes for your application, and ensuring that you have the kind of coverage that you're looking for in the areas you need the coverage.
And so, Mike, you touched a little bit on the digital divide, and we know that gaps are out there, and there are those who have access and those who don't. What is 5G's role here, and how can we ensure that no one or no area in Maryland is left behind as we build out 5G?
Well, I think it's important, as they pointed out, the aspects of legislature, restrictions, permitting, things like that. It's extremely important that we kind of loosen the reins. People, protest towers going up in their communities all the time. This is not that. This is, much less obtrusive. The installation of it, the visuals of it. I've been in areas where you wouldn't know that 5G small cell was even on that light pole. As you get further out of communities, it'll become, a little bit more apparent because it's less expensive to do non-decorative. But I think that as it pushes further and further to the edge, it's going to be more impactful for everybody. There will come a time where your carrier will tell you you have to get a new phone. In order to communicate, they've done it through the entire G spectrum that we've all lived through. So I think 5G is going to really cross the divide where it's not just about the device that's in your pocket. And I think 5G's impact on the digital transformation of how we interact on a day-to-day basis is going to be important because it's going to connect more devices. It's going to connect more people. It will connect you seamlessly to your car instead of possibly Bluetooth. There's a lot of different aspects. That high bandwidth user experience is going to be pushed further and further to the edge and impact more devices than just your smartphone.
5G, I also think, so recall that when you have wireless infrastructure, you have to have fiber to connect it together. So with 5G getting pushed further and further to the edge of these networks, you also have fiber at the edge of those networks. And that fiber deeper into underserved or unserved communities means that it's going to be more cost effective to get high-speed broadband to residents in areas that don't have it today. But it may not be a 5G service. It might be fiber to the home. It might be a fixed wireless service. So when you think about the digital divide, it's going to be a couple of different flavors all working together to help bridge that gap.
I think what we've seen in technology is we went from the cloud that everybody viewed as one space virtually and centralized cloud and data centers, these huge facilities. And now we're seeing micro data centers and data centers being pushed to the edge. The enablement of that infrastructure to push those further to the edge. 5G is not going to drive your car. Your car is going to drive your car. That processing power is in your car. The information that it gathers about your surroundings is what's going to be impactful. And it's going to be the same thing in industry, manufacturing, everything.
Yeah. Some of the clinical implications too, sort of why does this matter for medicine? I think, just some simple things like the interconnectivity of data. So sort of getting real-time, day-to-day biometric data back. So let's say, for example, you have a panel of patients, you're trying to get, a diabetic, maybe with, not as much resources sort of under control. So you could essentially, with monitoring, essentially get that data back. Not it's come back and see me in 3 months and we'll run through your blood sugar logs, but it could be a real-time connected sort of tracking, and it gives you an opportunity to identify trends, put a prevention strategy in place ahead of time, sort of early intervention. It also gives you an opportunity to individualize that intervention, and really sort of, I think that the real linchpin in any sort of health promotion strategy is getting the patient engaged. So with more interactions, not a visit, not I got to take time off and go see the doctor, but a quick touch point, an alert, a hey, did you know? We can get patients more engaged in your healthcare, and as soon as you flip that switch, health outcomes significantly improve. So why does it matter? Better clinical outcomes, less cost. More efficiency. So really, the sort of investments we place in the infrastructure adjustment really will pay dividends down the road in clinical outcomes and cost containment.
Well, and I think another aspect of that, healthcare. I mean, you drove me right to an aspect that we don't talk about too much, and that's public safety. And so, with AT&T, I mean, I know we have a broad range of folks in the room, but just go back. Well, I hate to say this, but I guess 20 years. You think 9/11. And first responders' inability to communicate, with each other, interoperability and things like that. And the federal government said, we have to do something about this. So fast forward, a decade later, Congress finally passes a bill, says we need a network dedicated to first responders. They go out to RFP, AT&T wins that contract, and we've been working in concert with the federal government to build out that dedicated lane for first responders. We call it Band 14. It's that low band that Carly was talking about that, gets that in-building coverage. But everyone's walking around, with a cell phone. That first responder needs to know where you are. If you're in an apartment building, well, what floor are you on? How do we even know how to get to you? Because you may not even have a landline in your house anymore. So it's important that we have ubiquitous coverage basically everywhere throughout the state. And so we're incentivized to build out in areas maybe where it's not economically feasible for some other folks to do so. So, we're doing new coverage in Dorchester County, Allegheny County. We have some sites coming on in Charles County that outside or, not for FirstNet, maybe we wouldn't have invested, at this point in time. We would say it's not time yet. But because of that, when first responders aren't using that network, that broadband or that wireless connection is available for the mom at home with the student. The connectivity that wasn't there before, they're able to connect to their classroom. So there are many layers to this, but everyone can benefit if we invest in the infrastructure, if we clear kind of the hurdles. And, it's a matter of life and death in many cases, and I think that's only going to continue to be so, more so in the future.
That's a great point and a great segue too. So where are we in Maryland as a state? What do we still need to make this a reality? And how long is it going to take for us to get there?
I'll let you go.
So, I think Maryland benefits from having a lot of areas in the state that are very well developed and very, very urban, because what we see is that we first get connectivity, new technology in urban areas, and then it fans out from there. So we're at a point where we have all these urban centers built, we're adding the 5G support, and with the incoming infrastructure money from the federal government for the state to distribute, it means that we're now going to be able to go out even further into communities. And I think that we've had a lot of investment over time. We had broadband funding, BTOP and BIP from so many years ago. We have, dedicated public safety money now building out infrastructure. So I think Maryland, in a lot of ways, is ahead of many places. It's also behind probably some others. But it's about, it's going to be industry and government and community working together to help get rid of the barriers and the hurdles so we can quickly get infrastructure deployed.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because it's always driven by that user experience, which is driven by the number of users. That's why the carriers build those networks to support those devices. And my cell phone coverage today in Cambridge, Maryland, is not the same as it is certainly in downtown Baltimore. So it will get to outlying areas later than it does to more urban areas. But it is coming. We've seen a huge push with some of the carriers on existing bands. AT&T is already putting 5G on 850 that they already have on their towers. So they're replacing radios, not a heavy lift. It takes time. There's thousands and thousands of sites. T-Mobile deploying 5G on both 600 and 2500. Verizon's deploying it in that 850 band and will probably be the first to market with C-band technology on their actual sites. So I think it's important to look at where you're at, what your expectations are for 5G and when you'll have it. And I think Maryland is actually on par. Being a national integrator, I think Maryland is actually leading the way in a lot of categories, especially in the city center areas with the carriers. So, versus California is a little bit further behind in some areas. I think Maryland being more compact, closer knit communities, I think it'll be a little bit faster than a lot of areas in the U.S.
I'll just say briefly that we're doing better than a lot of places, but I think we can always go faster. Just for example, so you guys can understand some of the hurdles that I've been talking about, rather than maybe having a statewide piece of legislation, to cover, the 5G or the permitting process and kind of laying out the framework for how we're going to move forward, we've had to go county by county. We've done it. We worked with Prince George's, we're working with Montgomery, Howard, et cetera, Anne Arundel. But if you had a statewide framework like some other places across the country, you can move that much faster. So there are just little hurdles like that, and then you have to make the case each time you go to a jurisdiction about why this is important. Here's why you need it. Here's what our traffic looks like in this particular area. Here's the benefit to, the citizens in this part of the state. So you just have to have that, conversation over and over again. So I think there's some areas for improvement. We're doing better than most, but there's room for improvement.
Yeah, I think a lot of entities kind of took FirstNet for granted, that they just expected it was going to be there. And I know AT&T, has worked closely with Safer Buildings Coalition and other places for, getting that public safety message out there and why. And it is harder in those rural areas than it is, in city centers that may already have a robust infrastructure. So it's a challenge, and I completely agree. A statewide technology initiative would really be helpful.
All right, so great discussion today. You know, a lot of what we spoke to is about the power and the potential of 5G, but still that there is a lot of work still to be done. And I know that we are standing in between you and lunch, so do we have a moment to take a few questions? Is that all right? So if there are any questions from the audience for our panelists, we can take those now.
Yeah, sure. I'll ask a question. I'm Ed Mullen. I represent the Baltimore Regional Tech Council. So I'm going to ask a question about Baltimore and the digital divide and how I think there's a thinking that urban areas are covered in broadband. And what we saw during the pandemic was Baltimore's a city that's not. And any thoughts on how that could be solved in a short-term manner to get like some sort of baseline municipal broadband?
Well, I'll just say, no, you're right. There's still pockets even within, you know, maybe dense urban areas where there's just not the connectivity that we would love to see. But I will say that it is continually improving. One of the things that we're pushing for, Carly mentioned, you know, fiber may be the answer in some cases. You know, if it's a cable provider, that may be the solution in some cases. But we're just pushing for agnostic, you know, advocacy, I guess, for, you know, whatever the technology is moving forward. Because in some cases, it's going to have to be, it's not ideal maybe in some cases, but it's going to have to be a hotspot. It's going to, you know, you may have faster coverage on your cell phone than you have coming into your house. It just really depends on where you are. And so it's figuring out what that looks like. There are subsidies. There's a new federal subsidy benefit program for low-income families that can take advantage of, you know, a $30 subsidy. That can help lower the cost of getting that internet in that home. So there are multiple approaches there. I think what we've seen is that many places across the country, networks, broadband are really best left to the private sector. I don't think we've seen many iterations of successful government-run networks. And eventually what happens in a lot of cases is those governments may stand up a network only to turn around and sell the assets to a private entity a few years down the road because of the cost of upgrades, technology, things improving, cyber, you name it. So we prefer to work with those entities to get the coverage where there is none and to really understand what the barriers are to why we don't have coverage there. We want to invest. When we want our customers to be able to go, connect, use their device, come up with innovative ways forward, get the schoolwork done, you name it. We want to see that happen. And anything the governments can do to help us achieve that connectivity, we're willing to do it.
Yeah, I think that people get confused by the heat maps that you'll see. 5G is in Baltimore, and here it is. There's, you know, 1,600, you know, small cells throughout downtown Baltimore. But we have to remember that above the 5th floor, 6th floor, right, you don't see that because it's really meant for street level communications or just, you know, inside the building. And millimeter wave, as we said, doesn't go through walls. The advantage of having that built out, as Carly pointed out, is now we have the fiber infrastructure there that could be extended into those buildings, extend that network into buildings, into tenancy, to offer, you know, a distributed antenna system inside that building that could broadcast that signal within that building.
And that's exactly what we're doing.
Right.
So we're working with the schools in Baltimore to connect them all to fiber. So that's putting fiber in every single neighborhood, regardless of if there's small cells or tower connectivity for wireless or not. So the infrastructure's there. Our franchise agreements with the city of Baltimore, when we build fiber, we are required to give fiber to the city. So they have fiber, and what they're trying to do now is, you know, work on, well, how do we get this out there? So one of the things, exactly as Chris said, is they're thinking about, you know, Wi-Fi, you know, and putting hotspots in the neighborhood because that's one of the fastest ways for them to be able to improve connectivity with the resources that they have.
So one of the things that I've also worked with the city of Baltimore and various other cities with this same challenge, and one of the challenges between kind of commercial trying to address that pain point versus where does the government step in? And I don't want to get into a religion thing, but one of the challenges on the commercial side is, well, if there aren't paying subscribers, I mean, that's very difficult. So there's an affordability, there's the access is one component, The other component is how do you sustain that affordably? And I think, Chris, you were talking about subsidies potentially and so forth. But how do cities, and this is where cities and rural are very similar, because it's the same, there's a lot of physical infrastructure that has to be built out, and if no one's paying for it in the long term, that's not sustainable for anybody. So a lot of government, city, county, states are dealing with how do we deal with the ones that aren't in the digital, inside the digital bubble, that are outside the digital bucket. Do you do it with broadband via 5G or fiber from a carrier? And or do you have kind of the city potentially, whether it's create hotspots and create ways of kind of bridging it, or creating maybe different tiers? And there's lots of different models for this, but basically there's a lot of where does the city want to invest, or the government entity? Where do they want to be in the long term? Do they really want to be in this business? Or is it something that they recognize, hey, if we enable more connectivity for our citizens, it creates greater economic opportunities? So it's a tightrope. But there's a lot of cities, especially, are grappling with how to deal with this. Like LA, I know, is doing a big fiber broadband for the citizens. It's not the same capacity, but at least they're doing, we'll call it the bare minimum. So they'll make sure everybody has 25 meg, or I don't know what the specifics are, but they'll give enough bandwidth so you can do certain things. But if you want better quality, you need to go buy a service from an actual provider. So you're going to see a lot of different models come out from a lot, and never mind Baltimore specifically, but from a lot of different cities and counties and municipalities.
Quick question here.
Oh, sorry, there was somebody there.
Steve Pennington with the Maryland Tech Council. What are the realities of the shared networks out there? Recognizing that you've got blue, red, and pink, everybody's in competition, is the competition at the device side or the network side, the quality of the network? How do you really get that shared economies of scale? That Paul was talking about, where you get networks out there where then becomes a competition, bring the device, but the network will serve multiple customers. It doesn't matter what the logo is, but can serve multiple customers.
So Crown Castle builds shared networks, if that's the answer to your question. So from an infrastructure standpoint, I build one small cell, and my design will incorporate the radio equipment for all the wireless carriers, regardless of color, even Dish when they're ready. So that way you get build once, and everybody has access to it. It just depends who signs up to get on the service. I think each company has their own set of devices and functionality and, whiz-bang free stuff that goes with it. So, I've moved from company to company over time. I don't know that anybody's ever going to say one is better than the other. They offer different things for different people.
I don't think you're ever going to have a ubiquitous phone that's capable of connecting to multiple devices. You can have multiple SIMs in a phone and maybe connect to two networks currently. Or a CBRS network on one side and a carrier network on another. But all of that really comes down to Crown Castle, in addition to owning fiber assets, has thousands of tower assets with multiple carriers on them. The networks that Vision Technologies builds inside of a building are all meant to be neutral host. Any carrier can join at any time by plugging into that system.
And Mike just brought up CBRS, he just kind of threw it out there, but that's basically an open band for government to use for its own purposes. So some municipalities, counties, and so forth are leveraging that and throwing their own private 5G, or public, I got that backwards, it's hard to say that. They own it, but it's public, yeah, but anyways. So there's a lot of players here, and I think I totally agree with Carly. I use the analogy of highways. You don't build parallel physical highways right beside each other. It's visually obvious, but when it comes to that underlay fiber infrastructure, there's a lot of potential capital that has to go in to put that in, and reducing some of that can be cross-leveraged, I'll use that term, for whether it's state use, commercialization, et cetera, is where we try and advise the states we work with and the municipalities, like, do as much of that as possible so you can make your dollar stretch further. And as Mike said, pink, what is it, pink, blue, and what colors you said? Red. And I'm like, that last part, they're just going to say over the internet. That's how you connect. That's we're just we're doing different things, and that's okay. They're providing a different value statement effectively.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists, all for your expertise, and thank you so much to the Maryland Tech Council for shedding light on this important topic and for having us here today. We appreciate it. Thanks.